rise above the static, dissecting issues diplomatic. With mics in hand, they brave the storm of clashing views and norms transform. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining lights on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they pause the spinning and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view.
Hey everybody, this is Razib and Josiah, and we are here with what is it, Josiah?
Episode
What are
number
we here with?
7.
Yeah, conversation number 21. Yeah, this is you're like my crystal ball to Sagar and Jetty. That's why we have me just introduce it, you know.
I think that's a compliment. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that depends on where you stand and how you're feeling in the day, you know. But yeah. So I guess we're gonna be, you know, I mean, should we announce? I mean, I don't know if we have like a protocol what we're gonna talk about, but our current plan, I'll just like say it ahead of time.
Yeah,
we'll talk about the vibe shift, Neanderthals, and then we'll talk about my
your connection with the killer.
my erstwhile fan Luigi.
Right, you got to pay to find out.
Mangione, yeah, I'll talk about. I'll dish some teapot tea, some, you know, like the dirt that I know, which I actually do. I actually did find out some dirt about him. Actually, that is I don't know if it's like. I mean, there's not like, you know, the stuff is like we know what we need to know about him, but. Right. You're gonna want to know the dirt that I have. That's all I'm gonna say. So the vibe shift. So the vibe for the, you know, I mean, there's some non-Americans listening who are like, what? It's like, it's more of like a Zoomer word, younger millennial word, and it's been around forever. Vibes have been around since, I mean,
these things
before us. I mean, like, you know, it used to be. It's one of those words that used to be, you know, like the word groovy, which never came back. The word groovy was a big word in the 70s, and then it kind of disappeared. Maybe it got too associated with disco. Vibes were a huge thing, like before our generation came of age, and we were like, no, that's kind of cringe. Stop saying vibes. I remember, was this in the 1990s? There was a Real World. This is like a TV show for those of you who don't know about like reality TV before reality TV was a thing. And there's a Real World where one of the guys said, "I'm getting bad vibes," and on the internet, everyone was making fun of him for saying vibes. This was like the late 90s, I think, you know, or like it was like 96, 97, something like that. It was one of the I think it was in Real World Boston that Sean Duffy was on, actually. Yes. And Sean was also saying vibes after. It was a blondish guy, and he's like, "I'm getting bad vibes," and then Sean Duffy started saying vibes, and everyone's like, why is everyone saying vibes? It's like no one says vibes, you know? So I think it's really funny that, you know, words like recycle and come back that used to be, well, I mean, it's like names. So for example, I'm not going to say what, but, you know, my sons have names that are like great grandparent age names for our generation is what I would say. So, you know, I have I have like older, like this is a real story, you know, at the playground, and I yell at my son, and this old woman comes up and she's like, "Oh, my uncle had that name," and she was like, you know, 75, you know, and so that's what happens to names in terms of, you know, like you're not, for whatever reason, Edith is still not back yet, but it will be someday, I think.
Perhaps, yeah.
And that's a vibe, you know.
Yeah. Let me just a little bit of a tangent on the names thing, because I think one thing I have noticed just from you know, the names of kids at my children's schools, other places like that, we're about like it's already started, but in about 10 years, the names are just going to get totally crazy. You know, I mean, I'm sure there still will be Johns and, you know, Sarahs and so on and so forth. But like in our, you know, my kids' schools, there are kids named Marvel, Sky, Samwise, all the forms of Aiden, Braden, Caden, Raiden, Jaden, Zayden, how you could do that. So maybe there will be eventually a backlash to that, and we'll coalesce on some sort of more standard stuff. But right now, it just seems to be like and some of this may just be culturally segmented. I don't know. Certain like different cultures have had, or different subcultures have had different philosophies on naming. So like some subcultures for a long time have like enjoyed unique or unusual names, but now it seems like the kind of like upper middle class PMC or whatnot, everybody's like, well, we just got to have something different for the name, and so they're not doing all the same, right? So this is my prediction: is that like the names are going to get really weird for a while. I don't know if you have noticed that with your kids' classmates or anything.
Not super weird. I mean, my moderately weird. This is what I remember from the social science, and this is like a tangent, so I didn't like check what it said. But I mean, I remember reading like around when Sarah Palin was a big deal.
Yeah,
and her kids' names were super weird, like Track and Trig and Traylon and
right,
Trippany or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But but like the stylized fact was that actually, ironically, it was flipped where PMC, liberal, progressive, what we call progressive now, have more traditional names like Amelia, like stuff you can find in Little Women because they read, and then upper middle class, red state, like conservative people that are not professional, like the Palins were not really professional. They were like, what like my friend Patrick Wyman would call like, exurban gentry, they made a lot of money, just because they got good jobs and it works out, that which is a thing. I mean, there are people who have, like Sarah Palin's now ex-husband, he worked on like the North Shore in Alaska. It was a pretty hard job, but he was a big dude and he made a lot of money, whatever. Right. They could buy like snowmobiles and whatever stuff people like that do. But they also have like weird names apparently, and it's just not a big deal. Like, so it was, the irony was the conservative gentry have the progressive, like they have the non-standard names.
Right.
Whereas the professional managerial class is more like treated like, New England types have like names you can find in like American literature or something like that. And then there are other groups like Mormons, famously, they either have like weird names from the Book of Mormon, like Zubilee or something. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? They're like, I'm not gonna say anything about the Latter-day Saint religion. All I'm just gonna say is like their names from the Book of Mormon are biblically flavored, but a little different. So it's like, like you'll meet some guy and you're just like, I don't think I read that name in the Bible, but it seems like it should be in the Bible, Right. And so like that's a Mormon name, right? But then they'll also have like names like Track,
Right. Yeah. But, so, and I think, I mean, this is just anecdotal, but yeah, I think the PMC, just within the last, however long, has started to adopt a more
they've actually become more radical. Well, so one thing is there have been like, and I haven't looked at the literature for a while, for like literally 10 years. So there's always this thing where like, back when like Game of Thrones was big, and I guess like there's a lot of girls like named Khaleesi and all these weird things, and now they're actually writing about these kids because they're kind of annoyed because the show's been over. They don't remember the show being on. They're very vague about it. I mean, but their teachers are making fun of them and making jokes about them. They're like, okay, I don't know why you're like, this is an inappropriate joke for like a 7-year-old.
Right. I don't know. I'm not that familiar. I'm only like, I've never seen Game of Thrones. I've never read it. So I'm only like vaguely familiar or whatnot, but I would, I could be very awkward, I would think, to name your kid after most of those characters, right?
Okay, so this is like, we're talking about vibes again, in terms of like just like the cultural mood. That's like a little hard to put your finger on. It's pretty clear to me. Like I didn't watch, like I read the books back in the 1990s, and part of that like whatever. I mean, like the book's not going to get finished, but let's like set that aside. Those shows were produced like they were like around 2010 is when I think the first episodes came out. The spring or no, maybe spring of 2011. Anyway, my point is, if Game of Thrones had come out 5 years later, they would have been a lot more sanitized. There was a vibe shift where some of the very, very, let's just say unpalatable stuff, like, there was, and like that stuff is from the book, by the way, the books, which were conceived of and originally written in the 1990s.
Worse, right?
Yeah, the books were worse. That was the one thing that I tell people. It's like, actually, they're sanitizing stuff. And so, I mean, basically, you gotta wonder, like, what's going through George R. R. Martin's mind. But anyway, just set that aside, because like the sibling incest is just like almost like with like not mentioned because it is so not weird and compared to how like messed up that world is in some ways.
I mean,
But,
I don't want to judge a person based on their looks, but have you seen George R. R. Martin? You know what he looks
He's a man. He's a man of strong appetites.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I don't, I don't think I've ever like told this story on the conversation. I might have in some podcast, but this was like 2008 or 2009. I lived in Berkeley, and there was a science fiction bookstore. Some of you will remember by campus called it was like a Change of Hobbit or something, and it's in South Berkeley now. I think it's still around, but it moved around the recession time. But the clerk, I think he was a co-owner. We were just like chatting one day, and apparently, because he goes to the Worldcon or whatever, like these like nerd things. Like I'm a nerd, but I'm not that much of a nerd, But anyway, apparently, like Martin was there, and this was right after Robert Jordan, another big fantasist, had died of I think it was like some sort of like blood cancer or something, whatever.
without finishing.
So, yeah.
He had a huge long series of 1,000 books, fantasy, and then
the last like 2 or 3 had to be. I think it's the last 2 were finished by Brandon Sanderson. But anyway, apparently, like Martin had gotten hungry, and he ordered a pizza, but it wasn't like a personal pizza. It was like a large pizza just for himself,
right.
And there was like all sorts of gross toppings on it, and like some people were just like staring at him. And he realized that they were staring at him because he was worried, or they were worried that he was going to die. And so he got really angry because he's like, you just don't want me to die because you want me to finish the books. Yeah. And you don't really care about my health. And there was like a whole thing. Well, you don't really care.
Didn't everyone know that he would live for another 20 years and still not finish?
Yeah, I know the irony of that. But
90 and he's not going to finish. But
yeah. So I was going to say the literature on names, though, to a large extent, speaking of vibes, it can, because people talk about like, oh, there's a celebrity, so, the names become big or whatever. Like, there's some effect on that, but a lot of it is actually just random drift, which means that the names just go up and go down, and they can be just modeled as random. And we'll see, because I think what you're saying is that there's a different social dynamic going on. Some of this could be social media is allowing kind of like the movement of information about topics and questions that normally people would like talk about all the time, because I mean, maybe with your friends or I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like people would talk about certain parts of their lives as incessantly as they do now on social media, like some people, because some people are sharers and some people are not. There's going to be some people who are not going to be talking about their kids or their pregnancy or whatever. They don't want to jinx it.
Yeah.
But then there's other people that just like that's what their Facebook becomes, which I don't have a problem with. But I'm just saying that there's a lot more information going around the social graph about certain things, and I think perhaps that is the dynamic that's driving what you're talking about in terms of names diversifying. Because instead of kind of being isolated within your family, now there's like a local like internet subculture that a lot of people are talking to, and that's affecting them. That's one thing that I hypothesis I would posit.
Right. Yeah, I basically don't care that much if people want to give their kids weird names. I mean, like Elon, I guess, named his kids X.
Yeah,
it's taking it far, but like if you want to name your kid, Xerxes or
Darius.
I
mean,
or
we got
whatever.
Yeah, we got.
The only thing that really bugs me is when parents will give their child a normal name or like a typical name and then just spell it differently, like Tiffany with an I, or I don't know, like James Jaeemes or
Yeah.
something. And
Yeah.
that I could just say, like, I feel like that has all the downsides of having an unusual name without any upsides, right?
Well, it's, no, okay. Like
Was-
Aaron with an I, a male Aaron with an I, like
Right.
Arin. Weird. Okay, you know what that makes me think? It just thinks like, I think your parents might be retarded. You know?
Well, it's part of it is maybe they just don't know how to spell or whatever. But I also feel like sometimes they want to be like, oh, we want to be special, we want to be different, and like that, you're not actually being different because it only comes up. It doesn't sound different. It sounds like a normal name, and it's only an issue when you have to write it down. And so, like every time they have this like what you're doing to your kid is like every time they have to fill out a government form or something else, it's going to get screwed up, and
Yeah. So what I was reading an article that these kids that had Game of Thrones names, their teachers are millennials, are elder millennials, and who were, like 20-ish or like, early 20s when the Game of Thrones came out. So it was a big deal for them culturally. But these
right.
kids are like,
They have no idea.
8, 10,
Right.
and they weren't going to watch Game of Thrones ended in 2017, and they were like 3. Okay, so they have no idea.
Right.
And like eventually they go into this world, and like the adults are like, oh, Khaleesi, I should sit you next to Drogon or something, and it's just like the kids are like, what? You have a weird name too, so
Right.
like, I mean, this is like, parents should not impose that on their kids. Like I think I didn't say this because I haven't mentioned this. Like, what was another thing is like, some my kids are pretty generic name. Well, not super generic, but like they're not ethnic, right? You know that. And
Yeah,
I was like,
I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but they have cool names. They sound like the names of emperors, and
yeah. So the last name pairs with the first. I think like aesthetically, I think people not in terms of just like but like we specifically did not give them quote ethnic names because that, like, if I have like my name Razib, like no one's like, oh, why do you have a name like Razib,
right.
But if I look like you and you were just like I don't know, I'm like, hey, I'm Razib, and you're like, hey, I'm Raju. I just feel like,
Right. Yeah.
okay, like I gotta, you know what I'm trying to say? It's like, and like the whole idea was like, I didn't really want my kids to like, like if they didn't look super brown or they don't look super brown, I didn't want them to like have to have a discussion every time.
Like,
Why do they have this weird name?
Right.
Actually, we have a friend. I'm not gonna say who it is, but we have a friend, and well, I mean, I'll just say like he has a generic name. He has a generic name. It's like I'll make it up, but it's like Aaron. Okay, like we call him Aaron. But our friend here, like you don't know him as well as I do. So anyway, but it's our circles in Austin. He actually grew up Hare Krishna. So his legal name is Indian, and he's just a white guy.
Right.
And I think his legal name is still Indian. And he'll tell people like, oh yeah, well that's my real name, but he decided to like change it to a normal name because like, you know what I'm saying? He was like, his first and last name are Indian, right? And so people are like, did an Indian couple adopt you? And it's just like he just didn't want to talk about it all the time, and he didn't want to talk about how he grew up Hare Krishna all the time. Not that he was, I mean, he's not Hare Krishna now, but it's not like he was traumatized by it. But
Yeah.
you don't want to have the same conversation every single time. So names do matter. They do have an impact, and we like got really off on a tangent, but the whole idea was like we were going to talk about the vibe shift. I think vibe shift, like yeah.
Before we get back, I just wanna say this is, there are a lot of aspects of society that are hard for racial minorities, people of color, other thing, and this I just want to highlight is something that's hard about. It's a disadvantage, I guess, in a sense for white people, because if you like. Anyone, like a person of any race can be named Sam, right? Like if you were named Sam, people were like, okay, I get it. Black person can be named Sam, Hispanic looking guy can be named Sam. But as a white person, like if I have a typical Asian name, then people start asking questions, So I just want to throw that out there.
Well, okay, so my
feel for
well, so I grew up in Oregon, and there's um so in terms of like vibe shifts, there was a vibe shift in the early Reagan years, and the long late 60s ended, and so we had like a bunch of people who were hippies, right? Like when we were little kids,
Right.
there were people like, yeah, you were a hippie. I mean, can I just say your dad had long hair like for a while? Like everyone went through a phase. Your dad's not a hippie; he was never a hippie. But there are people who just like never moved past
was
that.
a hippie, yeah.
Yeah, your dad was a hippie, but there are people that never moved past that. They stayed hippies in the 80s and 90s, and they gave their kids really weird names. And so I'm from Oregon. I know people with weird names like Moon, and stuff like that. I don't know. It's just some guy named Moon. I'm like, what? Oh, hippie.
Right.
So I mean, it's just like you can figure it out if it's like of a certain subculture or whatever. But yeah, like if you're I don't know, if you're not Hungarian, your first name is Attila.
Right.
It's gonna bring some questions.
I mean, maybe even if you are Hungarian, it will be some questions, right? But,
well, I mean, there are Hungarian named Attila. It's a popular name there. I mean, it's like Genghis Khan. They like him there. They like Genghis Mongolia.
Attila Khan, that could work. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I did toy with the idea of having a kid naming one of my sons Temujin. And I was like, nah, that's just a little too much.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I would have encouraged it myself, but
well, no, because you have I mean, I would say your name. Like, again, we're not saying the names, but like, I would say like your names are
super cat.
Your names are yeah, but they're similar to mine insofar as like, oh, they're not weird, but they're rarer.
Yeah. Well, only one of
most of them.
Only one of them is actually an unusual name, I would say. Like the others have religious significance, but
yeah,
they're names that like they share with like popular movie characters or actors or presidents or or actresses, right? So yeah. And that,
so I guess our news you can use is like, you can be creative, but don't be too creative.
Right. I did wonder, and I realized that we're going to do half an hour on this subject. It was not actually, it's just a tangent. But one thing that one thing that I have wondered is, there are these audit studies, right, where you send out resumes to people, and some of the resumes have a stereotypically white name, like, I don't know, Carl or Steve, something like that. And then some of them, it's the same resume, but they have a stereotypically black name, like, I don't know what names they use. Like, I guess like Dwayne, I don't know. Or
Laquan, or like Leroy.
Yeah, right. Something like that. And apparently, the findings of these audit studies are that if you have the stereotypically black name, you get called for an interview at a much lower rate. And I do remember when my son was about to be born, so my wife was pregnant, we're telling people what his name was going to be, and someone that we told, I won't reveal who, but there was someone that we told that, and they're like, oh, isn't that a black name? And that sort of made me wonder, like, with the audit studies, how much of that is race versus like socially atypical names, cause like someone who like, so I wonder, like, that would be, I think, something that I would like to see in future research is, okay, well, what if you do names that are like Moon, like if your name is Moon, resume, does that affect your callback rate the same as if your name is Laquanda
or X?
Or X,
like,
yeah, right.
We got this resume from some X Musk. Sounds kind of weird. I don't know. Let's just pass on this.
Yeah, X Musk, I think you'll get a callback probably, but like, You know?
And like he's like, wait, HR's like, that's the dictator of the world. You gotta look at this.
Yeah, they're like, okay, this is an important question. Is it just X or is there an I after the X? Because that could make a lot of difference, you know. I mean, we're going to give them a back either way.
I mean, we will talk about the vibe shift, but really, I do have to say, if I had to give like younger people advice, with kids, and hopefully you guys are doing your thing. I would say, not too weird, but I would also say, like, I don't know, you could go with like John or David, but get ready to, have like he's gonna have friends with the exact. I don't know. I just feel like, like, do you really want to give your kid a name that like literally like every 20th kid has, especially with like Joshua, John, David, maybe Michael, but I'm really thinking like Joshua and David in particular.
Matt.
There's just so many of them.
Matt.
Huh?
Matt.
Yeah, Matt. A lot of Matts. Like, like, that's more millennial, I would say. But yeah, or like it would be Ashley from millennials. Like that name's like declined, but it was like, oh my god, there was just like so many Ashleys for a while. Like, get over yourself, people.
Law school, there were, I think, 7 Catherines in my class. Like, not even just like in the whole school, but just in like my particular section of my particular year. But yeah, the advice I've always suggested is, like, if you want to go bold with a name, that's fine, but choose like a super generic middle name for the kid, so that if they really hate it, they can all, like, some people just go by their middle name, like even like Ted Cruz, like it's like Raphael Edward Cruz or whatever, or other people. So
Rafi,
yeah. And I knew, one of my actually law school professors, I think she went by Catherine, which was her middle name. I think her first name was Melvina, so okay. She decided,
that's pretty weird.
Like, yeah, she said, yes, especially for a girl, for a guy, I think as long as it's not a girl's name, I think, they'll probably be okay with it. But with the girl.
Well, okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's pretty good advice. I do have to say, if your name is Barack Hussein Obama and you're going to run for president, don't use your middle name. Just
yeah, probably not. Yeah. Well, I mean, he did go by Barry for a while. He was doing it, like he switched it up. But then I guess he decided, nah, Barack is fine. And
I think it's good that I think it's good that Kamala didn't go by her middle name Devi. I think that's like, that would be sacrilegious to some people.
Perhaps, yeah. I guess like Hussein was not a big deal, in the 60s when Obama was born. It wasn't like he couldn't have predicted, I think.
Yeah, Hussein would be like a hippie name where it's like nobody would know that name. Like, it's just like, the people wasn't on. This is before the oil shock. They didn't fucking know. Like they were maybe like, oh, is he a black Muslim? Maybe. But black Muslims had really weird names because they're like honestly not really Muslim.
Right. Right.
So they only Islamicized like Elijah Muhammad's son, like mainstreamed the community in the 70s. So before that, they just had weird names. This is just yeah. So we should go back to the vibe shift though. Let me like why don't you define what the vibe shift? You proposed it, so like why don't you define what's going on, like the terms?
Sure. So and the thing that struck me about this, for why we should talk about it, is I just saw today that in polling, President Trump has a positive net approval rating for the first time ever, right? It's like 49 positive, 47 negative, something like that. Whereas for most of his political life, he was in like, the low 40s. Like he's like at a net 10 negative, sometimes even more. Like he would be in the low 40s, high 30s, and then, negatives like high 50s, maybe 60%, something like that. And this is like some of this I think is just like a honeymoon period. In 2016, after he won, there was a period where his approval rate went up. This is pretty common for a new president or whatnot. It didn't go up as high, but this just kind of was making me think about how much, like in 2016, it was very like outside certain circles, like nobody was publicly supporting Trump. Like there was a lot of social, like if you said that you supported Trump or whatever, that was a big problem, you know. And now, obviously, that hasn't totally gone away, but it's just much more socially acceptable. It's even in like PMC environments to be for Trump, right? It's not a majority position necessarily, but like, yeah, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, you know, business, other stuff. And along with this has gone like, it does seem like in the last 6 months to a year, there just has been a general rightward shift in the culture in all sorts of different ways, right? From, you know, like people taking pronouns out of their bio, getting rid of like DEI stuff, movies like starting to be, like, I don't know if you, like, are you familiar with the show Landman? Have you ever heard of the show Landman? So
No.
it's new. It's Billy Bob Thornton, and it's about
Oh, okay, yeah, I saw the clip.
yeah,
I didn't know what the show was called. Yeah.
yeah. So I've only seen like clips or whatnot, so I don't totally know, but you know, he's like a landman is someone who, you know, for an oil company goes around and tries to get rights from people to drill and so on and so on. So that's kind of what it's about. And the thing about these clips is it's like a mix, because like there's a bunch of clips that are just like he's got like a teenage daughter who's some like blonde, who's always talking about sex or whatever. But then there's also just like clip after clip, which is different characters giving like inspiring speeches about how great oil is and how renewable energy sucks and, you know, climate change, whatever, you know, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So some of that, you know, it's just like, that's a new thing, I would say, right? Like 4 years ago, if you had a show about the oil industry, you know, it would all be about like, oh, we're destroying the planet. I feel so bad about it, you know, and we're also racist, and et cetera, et cetera. So it does seem
Well, yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the main question here is, so you're talking about media. So there's polling. Like people are a little bit more skeptical of gay rights now. Trans stuff has dropped a fair amount. There's been a rightward cultural shift on like some issues. I mean, I think the only issue that just like almost never changes is abortion. I think like a lot of other issues like immigration and have like thermostatic tendencies and whatever. Like,
right.
you know. Okay, so that's true. I guess the question is, when it comes to media and stuff like that, does it reflect the culture, or is it pushing the culture? I think I'm more of reflection, and I'm going to give you an example of an earlier vibe shift. Fast Times in Ridgemont High is a movie from the early 1980s.
Right.
You know, I think it's like in the genre sex comedy. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like Porky's or anything. It wasn't that bad. There was some toplessness, whatever, but. It was like, you know, obviously like actors in their 20s playing people in their teens, but whatever. There was an abortion that was depicted in that movie, and it wasn't depicted super controversially, right? So that changed in the 1980s, and that changed because of pro-life activists and like basically Hollywood made a compromise. Religious people were still kind of weirdos and freaks. You know, like they're notable in some way, but they would, you know, Hollywood was pretty socially conservative. So if a character got pregnant, and like let's say the source material, so Circle of Friends, the movie Circle of Friends, which is for the 1990s, early 1990s, Minnie Driver's in it. It's her first big break. Yeah, in the book, I believe one of the characters has to get an abortion, whereas in the movie, she has a miscarriage.
Right.
And that just reflects like that's how they would resolve those issues. Like you would have a miscarriage and it's like, okay, well, it was a miscarriage, right? And obviously these are the producers and everyone involved. Like they're pro-choice, they're liberal, but they understood like the way the culture was. You don't want to alienate half your audience, right? And they'd obviously like made a stink at some point. Something happened because the fact that like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is not a controversial, it was a mainstream movie, that indicated that in the early 80s they were not woke to that. They were not like conscious that that would alienate enough of their audience. Well, they were. I don't know if that has changed. I don't watch enough media, but that just shows you there have been things that have changed. Or let's talk about Braveheart. In Braveheart, homosexuality is not depicted positively, right? And like, in fact, in the 1984 Dune, homosexuality is not depicted positive. It's basically if a character is homosexual, that's a clue that they're evil.
Right. Well, and
that changed.
I mean, it's also in Gladiator 2, like Denzel's villain character is supposed to be like bisexual or whatnot. Well,
I mean, but bisexuals are weird because like people don't, both gays and straights have beefs with them, so maybe they're a good scapegoat. I did watch that movie, but my point is like, the media will reflect certain things. Now, one thing that we know as I'm older and I know how this works, is during BLM time, movies like large movies, they have casting has lead time, and so my kids and I went and watched the Willy Wonka movie, and I'm just like, okay, it's a fine movie, but why is about 40% of the population of this 1920s pseudo European city black?
Yeah.
With like no explanation, and so I think what was happening around like the early 2020, 2021 is they were like, okay, we're gonna fix our diversity problem by just casting black people in everything, and there was like a Black Little Mermaid and all this stuff, and there is look, we've had race blind casting for a while. There was in the 1990s there was a Much Ado About Anything with Denzel, okay?
Yes.
Washington. And I think that was okay because look, most of us who are not illiterate have read enough Shakespeare to know like what Shakespeare is, and we're not trying to figure out the world. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not like Much Ado About Nothing is not a historical. It's not a historical period piece.
Yeah,
it's actually more about the language and about Shakespeare. And so, like, who cares if they like that's what I remember thinking. I was like, oh, that's a little weird, but it's not like this is really Elizabeth. You know what I'm trying to say? It's just like,
right.
Shakespeare is like some sort of like kind of fantasy, and so I didn't really care. But I've heard that they cast a random black guy as an extra in Wolf Hall, which is I think based on. Yeah, okay, so that's based on like the early like Henry VIII, and I think one of his advisors, I forget, Cranmer or whatever. And I'm just like, this is just like, it's like if you're watching the show Vikings and you see like one of the thralls is like Indian, and like he's cooking something, and you're like, is he cooking curry? I don't know. It's just like it's ruining it. There used to be things people used to care about stuff like that.
It's about suspension of disbelief. You got to. It's a matter of like what is going to take you out of the drama. Because like none of it is real.
Yeah,
it's just actors, cameras, and whatnot. So you want to maintain a sense of like a verisimilitude or whatever in order to get people to actually engage in the story. And when you have, in the same way that if you were doing something in ancient Rome, it wouldn't make sense to have like someone on their cell phone, right? Because that's like anachronistic. Or with Vikings. So yeah, I personally. I kind of have a Denzel Washington exception, like if they wanted to do a movie about samurais and Denzel was there, I'd be like, okay, whatever, fine.
No, Denzel Washington, he's a whole thing. He's a famous person.
Right.
Denzel Washington is not a black guy anymore, right? It's like there are people, we don't have that many movie stars anymore. There are people who are so famous, so accomplished, such cultural icons that they overwhelm all their identity categories. Denzel Washington is one of those people, right? Now, if it was like, Joaquin Jones, I don't know who that guy is,
Right. Yeah. Right. And I there probably are limits. Like if you cast Denzel as George Washington in like a picture or whatever, that would probably be a little weird. I don't know. I would still see it probably, but
Yeah.
but yeah,
There's boundary conditions. There's boundary conditions.
right.
But I mean, overall, like, I mean, just going back to the vibe shift, because
Yes.
I want to address it. There has been changes. I'll give an example. And it's like from our lives in terms of just like something that I remember striking me. And it's not like a big like secret, so I think I can say it. It's like, I was hanging out with you and your wife, and some other friends. Like, it was like 6 of us at your house. I think it was like 2017, 2018, and we were just talking about the changes. Like, okay, like, so when we were younger, like, I think when I tell this story in public, like, you would like look around and like wonder why I'm not whispering. But look, when we were younger, as Gen X men, we would joke about being lesbians in men's bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, that was like a big funny joke. And now it's like, all of a sudden it became real, and we're like, wait a second, that was a joke that I used to tell.
Right.
And we were talking
Not
about
the
like these
only
trans
thing.
issues.
Yes.
Yeah, we're talking about trans issues, and and then you're like, we were in your house around your friends.
No.
And
No. Go ahead.
no, we were in your house. This is the incident I'm talking about. Is we were in your house. Your wife like was talking about it, but she like looked around and whispered in your house. So
Right.
there was like, it was like, that's how scared people were in the late teens during like the awakening, where it's like basically your muscle memory carries into your private life in terms of like you can't say certain things in public, you'll get in trouble, and people will just continue it on even privately, right? I don't think we're there anymore.
Yeah, and to some extent, I'm thinking about the vibe shift. A lot of it may just be a return to normalcy, a return to like the pre-2014 or whatever attitude, because prior to that, I didn't really have I never felt any need to self-censor, even when I, like in college or other places, I had positions as a social conservative that were very unpopular in that social domain, but I never felt, and maybe some of it was my own naivete, but I never felt like I needed to self-censor, or I couldn't say what I really thought. And I was right in that, like, no one ever tried to like cancel me or ostracize me or other stuff from that. And so that, I think some of the vibe shift is just like a return to normal, and a return. I do think people are kind of governed, like the media or whatever. Ultimately, they're disciplined by what the public wants. But sometimes, there was a period, a few years on either side of 2020, or however you want to say it, where they kind of lost sight of that, and they were doing stuff that, I don't know if they thought this is what the public wanted or if they didn't care, but they were just doing stuff that clearly was not geared. It wasn't what the public was demanding necessarily. I remember reading a story. It was a couple of years ago. Amazon was trying to figure out whether to produce this show. And it was a show about, I think they might have produced it, I don't know, but it was like a black woman who like goes to the South and like ponders racism and like institutional racism, and maybe there's like a murder or something that she's got to solve, but like that's basically what it was. And so they had focus groups, and they're like, okay, would you like to see that show, or would you like to see this other show? And they basically took Starsky and Hutch, and they just described Starsky and Hutch. So it's about these two cops who solve crimes, and every episode has like, lots of car chases and big fight scenes, and there's not a huge amount of intellectual content to it, blah blah blah. And of course, focus groups, what do they want? They want Starsky and Hutch, they want that sort of thing. They don't want to watch like this, ponderous everything is racism stuff. But for a while, that's what was on offer, right? Like everything had to be kind of like that.
Yeah, like let's. I mean, this is look. I mean, we've been talking for a while, but like, there's just so much here. I think part of it is, most people are kind of like dumb, and they just want to like eat, watch like fun films,
right?
And just like hang out with their family. They just want to grill. I think for for a hot moment there, for whatever reason. I think the ZIRP, zero interest rate period, when money was free and cheap and it was just like flowing through our society. I think that actually had a huge effect on businesses because I think businesses lost discipline in terms of what their customers and consumers wanted, and they thought they could do whatever they wanted to because they could just like put more money into it. And like Netflix was spending all this money, for example, on just all sorts of projects, most of them which like failed. Well, what happened there is the creator class, the producers, the writers, whatever, who tend to be, professional, managerial, liberal, et cetera, these are people that know. I mean, I think we both are adjacent, like even if we're not identified with that class or identified with the ideology, these are the people that we meet in professional. We can speak the language, we can understand what they're saying. Regular people could never understand this. They were like not fixated on this. This was actually like ultimately it was alienating and confusing and perplexing to the public. So the vibe shift is partly a kind of like, we talk about populism in politics, but this cultural populism in terms of people just want to be entertained. They don't want to be taught something. It would be like if all of the books like at the supermarket was replaced with literary fiction.
Right. Well,
People
not
be like, what the hell?
Literary fiction, but like contemporary literary fiction, or
Yeah, it's like and like also there were things about I don't know, I forget what TV show it was, like an episode of Star Trek. So Star Trek, as most of you guys know, have been around since it's almost 60 years. Yeah, almost 60 years. Right. So obviously it's changed and it's like reflects the culture. There was an episode in one of the new Star Trek shows where I think an alien or something like that, like there's a pronoun discussion. Okay. So here's the thing. Even in 2015, that would be kind of weird. People would be confused. So obviously the science fiction show is reflecting the mores of like 2021, where people talk about pronouns and stuff like that. And now I think pronoun discussions are starting to get like weird again. And we saw this even in 2019 at the peak of, which is kind of the peak of wokeness, where Kamala Harris introduces herself as like she, her, and Cuomo, I forget, not Andrew, the other one, well, whatever, the Cuomo that was at CNN was kind of just made fun of. Yeah, Chris, he kind of made fun of it.
Right.
Because he was like, what the hell? Like it wasn't even mainstream among like CNN anchors yet, like at least among the Chris Cuomo types, Right. So, and I think that's one reason Kamala Harris lost, because she got ahead of her skis, like, too much time among San Francisco liberals.
Right.
Like so what a lot of people say, what a lot of progressives say, what a lot of woke people would say, and this is what politically correct for people, well, just politeness, but like, basically what they're trying to do is impose certain norms of politeness. So for example, I've had people who are like not even conservative tell me this. Like when it comes to like homosexuality, when it comes to gayness, one of the problems with gayness is like the identity is baked into the cake with like kind of throwing who they have sex with in your face, and a lot of people just don't want to think about that. Now, they'll say like it's a double standard. Like if you introduce you to your wife, it's like, oh, like now these two people are having sex. I don't know. So they will say that, but a lot of the issues with gay culture, especially gay male culture, is it's very sexual. And so when you're talking like politeness, we like conservatives will not say, well, it's just polite not to talk about your sex life all the time. They'll just say that's wrong. They'll use a different word. Yeah. But it's the same thing. It's just like, okay, like, you don't want, people don't want to know this, like what you do. Like, we don't want to know that, like, and I think that's one of the problems with trans, when we see like Dr. whatever, the HHS person, it's like a man dressed like a woman saying that he's a woman. It's like, yeah, it's just like, this is just too much cognitive overhead for most people. And, me and you, like, we are like educated in a certain way to be polite. Maybe we'll like hold our tongue. But like a normal person, like your mechanic would be like, what the hell? Right. And I think so American culture just had like a what the hell moment. Yeah. And Trump won. And also like a lot of, I mean, it's not totally true that go woke, go broke, but a lot of the art that was excessively woke actually failed. Just right. Like, and we've talked about this before, just like a lot of like excessively like, I talked about with Peachy Keenan actually on my other podcast, but I think we've talked about this before too. Excessively Christian media is not good because it's not about the art, it's about the message.
Right.
And that's the exact same thing with woke comedy, for example. What it reminds me of, there is Christian comedy that's funny, clean comedy,
Right.
but there's a lot of Christian comedy that's like, okay, like if you want to preach, just preach. Like,
Yeah.
I don't really sure if like comedy is the best venue for this preaching. And similarly with the woke stuff, exact same can apply.
Yes. I agree that's true. And you know, the with the Christian stuff, it's not such a big deal because there's like a sub market that they appeal to, you know? So if you're making like one of these Christian movies, I mean, there are like sometimes they'll do like a crossover, you know, something like that. But a lot of times, like these movies come out, they have their own, it's not like they are appealing to you, right? Or even, you know, they know their audience. They're doing something that the audience likes, and that's fine, right?
Yeah, they have their own formula.
Yeah,
like that secular person who's selfish,
right?
They're gonna find Jesus by the end of the movie.
Yeah, right. In the same way that, like, I mean, it's, you know, the yeah, right. Whereas the woke stuff, at least in theory, is supposed to be for everybody. You know, it's not.
Yeah. I think the vibe shift is a collapse in the attempt to be culturally hegemonic. And like, I'm not gonna lie, you know, I mean, I'm pretty open, you know, about my beliefs and stuff like that. But recently, I've actually just like, I've taken. Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they'd long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' right. In civil discourse, we can find the ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the common understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand on any aspects of the lyrics?